Good evening. This is the final chapter of this book. Next video, I will give you my closing thoughts, reflections. Because bear in mind, this book ends in 1990, and we know what happened after that. 2001, 9/11 happened. 2020 happened, and even if this author does not make a follow-up book to this, I would like to see someone, maybe somebody else, uh, create a follow-up, because yeah, it would be interesting to see a book about Japanese American woman from 1990 to 2026, or maybe even a little bit beyond, because I know even 6 years later, after 2020, it's still a little bit too soon. Plus, we see after decades pass, then we could look more objectively about exactly what happened in 2001, 2020. So, with that, let me summarize chapter 15, diversity. So, as of 1990, even today, Japanese Americans, they're still not entertaining the thought of becoming next president of the United States. Um, Especially at 2026, we see this even more differently than we would if we were talking about this back in 1990. But Sansei women have achieved many things that their Nisei mothers and Issei grandmothers could not even begin to imagine. Many Sansei women are college graduates. Many are white collar workers. Some are using the abused blue collar ordinary women. So it's same as general society. Some women have university education, some don't. Some are white collar workers, some are blue collar workers. Voices of the 1980s. So, to put this into context, in 1968, UC Berkeley students attended the Third World Strike. Ms. Morita changed her major from pre-med to political science and sociology, and she joined the movement to add ethnic studies to the university curriculum. Mr. Obrochta, a law student, said that she grew up in average middle-class America. Her friends' parents expected the children to marry their own kind. She was grateful that her parents were broad-minded. Granted, she did understand the need to maintain the bloodline, keep the culture. However, her husband, who's not Japanese, is very much into keeping the culture. So she hopes the next generation will have the same inner strength that the first and second generations have. Now, the next section talks about Vincent Chin. The author assumes that you know what happened, because obviously this book was written in 1990, 8 years later, so it's still too soon. It's still fresh in everybody's mind. But since I'm doing this book review in 2026, let me tell you what this is about. So, give you some background information. So when she does talk about Vincent Chin, you will understand the historical context. So Vincent was born in China in 1955. His foster mother had a miscarriage in 1949. As a result, she and her husband adopted him and brought him to the United States. Now, for background information about this couple, her husband was a World War II veteran, so he was in this country when World War II began, and he used his status as a World War II veteran to bring his bride from China to the United States. Now, in 1971, his foster mother, Vincent's foster father, was mugged in Highland Park, Michigan. So they moved to Oak Park, which is a little bit less racist, a little bit safer. He studied at a vocational school and private university. He was working as an automobile supplier. So by him, I'm talking about, let me specify this, because this may, is it foster father or Victor? So now they're in Oak Park, Michigan. Victor studied at a vocational school and a private university, and he was working as an automobile supplier. So you can see he's born and raised in China, but he's adopted by Chinese immigrant parents. So he's Chinese American. and he's working as an automobile supplier. So in the early 1980s, there was an economic recession, and a lot of auto workers were laid off. And obviously, when you're laid off, you're angry. You gotta direct your anger somewhere. So many people blamed the Japanese automakers for causing their job loss because they're auto workers. You know, Japanese automakers, they're making more efficient cars that is cheaper. You know, so obviously consumers go where they can get a bargain, so they're more likely to buy Japanese cars than American cars. And what also fueled this hatred against Japanese people is that the politician from Michigan, so the same state, um, used a racial epithet against Asians when he blamed Japan for their domestic automakers' misfortune. And around this time, there was also a campaign to air quotes buy American. So you can see 2026. Why does this sound familiar? So you can see this is 1980s. Right now we're in 2026. Guess what? The same thing is happening over again. So June 1982, Victor was attending his bachelor party at a club in Michigan. On the other side of the stage, because they were, because the club, you got a stage, you got people, dancing around on the stage. Victor and his friends are on one side of the stage. These two guys are on the other side of the stage. So on the other side of the stage, there were two white men. One is a Chrysler plant supervisor, and his stepson who was recently laid off from his job as an auto worker. So you can see there's tension right there. An African American woman danced on the stage. Out of respect, Vincent gave her a generous gratuity. Now this angered the two white men because they don't see him as American. They see him as a Japanese automaker who cost them their job. A fight started. Vincent's friends were escorted by bouncers, so the bouncers protecting them, taking them to the restroom so they can clean their wounds. One of Vincent's friends went back to the stage to apologize to the white men. I'm so sorry, my friends are drunk. We didn't mean anything by it. Now, when Vincent and his friends left the club, the two white men also left the club at the same time. Now, keep in mind, all of them had been drinking that night before they entered the club. This is a no alcohol club, but I am assuming as long as you don't drink in the club, it doesn't matter if you walk in drunk or buzzed. But anyway, one of the white men got a baseball bat from the trunk of his car, hit Vincent with it. Vincent and his friends ran from the scene. The two white men caught up with them when they ducked into a nearby McDonald's restaurant. The one with the baseball bat landed the blow that left Vincent in a coma. There were two off-duty officers nearby. The officers did arrest both men. However, after 4 days in the hospital, Vincent died. The court case did convict them for murder, but we know how the court system works in this country. Their murder conviction got reduced to manslaughter. The sentence was 3 years probation, $3,000 fine, plus $780 court costs. 0 jail, prison time. Now, so criminal case is over. We can't change anything about that. So a federal civil rights trial followed. They were found not guilty of murder as well. So the next thing, if criminal and the federal civil rights doesn't work, you file a civil lawsuit. So civil rights lawsuits were also filed. 1987, they settled out of court. So 5 years later, the court ordered them to pay $1.5 million. 2 years later, one of the men left the state and stopped making payments. November 1989, they went back to court over the debt. 1997, so this is 8 years later. So you can see how the justice system works. So slow. 1997, the family refiled the lawsuit to get payment. They're the Chin family. November 2015, one of the defendants asked that the lien on his property be lifted. January 9, 2016, the judge said no. As of 2026, the Chin family has not been paid in full, with no estimated time on when the payments will resume. Now, in the meantime, Vincent's mother returned to China because staying in the United States without her son and justice, it's just too much for her. And sadly, in 2002, so while all this court case is going on, she passed away from cancer. Now, before she passed away, she did say that had this crime happened in China, the two men would have been executed. She said that something's wrong with this country. Now, in memory, before she went back to China, in memory of her son, she started a scholarship to be administered by the acting Chief Justice. In 2010, there is a memorial at the intersection of Woodward Avenue and 9 Mile Road in Ferndale, Michigan. So please feel free to Google that so you can see what the memorial looks like. This case forced the image of Asian Americans as perpetual foreigners. This case happened before hate crimes became a legal term in this country. From this case, Asian Americans band together to ask for stronger federal legislation. I know some people might think, no, this is just 1980s. Right now we're 2026. We're past that. But 2020, the current administration referred to what happened in 2020 as the air quotes China virus. And here in California, including San Francisco, there were several Asian Americans, regardless of whether they're Chinese or not, they were attacked. So we can't say this is 1980s problem. It's not 2026 problem. It is, because 6 years ago, Asian Americans were blamed for what happened in 2020. So this issue is still relevant. It's still salient. So now going back to the book, Ms. Tajima and Christine Choi, they worked together to produce a documentary, Who Killed Vincent Chin? Is it the two white men? Is it the Japanese automakers making better cars that are cheaper, causing those two men to lose their jobs? That's why they were angry at him. What is it? Racial prejudice? Is it this? What is all the factors that went into this? Because obviously Vincent Chin is Chinese American. They're angry at Japanese automakers. So people, it's still, you can see people can't tell the difference between an Asian American versus something that's going on in Asia, and the result of them losing their jobs. So Ms. Tajima said the Asian Americans are part of this country. Their problems are real. That's what the film is about. Now, they interviewed another person, Ms. Jofuku. She was working as a carpenter in the U.S. Census. Her co-workers doused her with water. She was called Wendy Tokuda, which is a news broadcaster who was in the media at the time. When she worked as a coordinator for the U.S. Census, she felt that there's a common misconception that all Asian Americans are alike. The census needs to reflect diversity, and she feels that all Asian Americans need to speak up. The person at the interview, Ms. Hayase, said that the media hypes the success of Japanese multinational corporations. As a result, there's a misconception about Japanese culture. They think American Taiko is part of Japanese culture. They don't realize that, no, American Taiko came from a need for justice and equality for all people, being against assimilation and violence, for pride, and then Nikkei, Japanese American identity and culture. Ms. Narita wrote, so Ms. Narita wrote the One Woman stage show about Asian American women, using to question the various stereotypes people have about, for example, Vietnamese street workers, a teenage sansei, and a Filipina mail order bride. An anonymous sansei woman was assaulted with a buck knife. It threatened her life. She gave him money, cars, keys, etc. At the hospital, she was afraid, what would happen if the media got a hold of her story, because her Japanese American family is prominent in that city. Ms. Shimizu said that she feels that she needs to take an active role and strong position for equality in the general community as well as their own. The reason is Japanese American women are seen as not a threat and they play out the stereotype. Ms. Ogami said that she was born with three strikes: being a woman, being a minority, being young. She struggles with being docile and eager to please. She's actively being more direct and demanding. It's not an overnight process. Ms. Ishimoto said that being Japanese American is not a disadvantage. Instead, America needs to know what Japanese Americans have to offer. In conclusion, Sansei women have pride and high self-esteem. They grew up in a nurturing home environment with less prejudicial attitudes by Americans in general. They have strong feelings about family. They emphasize the importance of education by passing this on to the next generation. They have housing based on their income and status. They are educated, gain entry to private clubs, and have intermarried. However, they have not broken down all the barriers to full participation. They still don't have access to high-level executive positions in large businesses, industries, and government. They still have to exert political influence. They haven't gained entry into the highest status organizations. They haven't reached their peak. However, they continue to push past boundaries that were limited in the past. Something has to give, and hopefully it won't be their values. So in a couple days, I will give you my final thoughts, although I probably have said all of them when I was summarizing these chapters. Questions, comments, constructive criticisms, let me know, and I shall see you next time. Take care.